Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A'udhu billahi min ash-shaytan rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa afdalu salati wa tamu taslim ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina wa habibina Muhammad al-Mustafa wa ala alihi al-asfiya wa ashabihi al-atqiya wa tabi'in lahum bi khairin wa isanin ila yawm al-jaza. So thank you very much for those who are tuning in now live, as well as those who watch this in its entirety. And after the end of this presentation, we will avail ourselves for any questions and answers to give non-legal advice in regards to this particular topic, meaning not giving advice about any particular one case that you may be facing. I also encourage you all to share this video on your WhatsApp groups, on Facebook, on Twitter, because we are about to give some very important information updates regarding last week's signage into law, amending the Elliot-Larsen Civil Rights Act. Give you a little context about what hasn't changed in regards to the amendment, and also what are some things that are in jeopardy in regards to the lack of robust language of religious protections. We will go over that as well, and also give advice about next steps, because we are not here to simply point out problems, but we're also going to give some solutions, and as well as clarify some misinformation that is seemingly still being put out by some politicians and some community members in regards to the situation. Before I begin, I'm going to call on I'm going to bring my colleague on the stage, Sister Amy. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam, Brother Dawud.
Yeah, so as I'm sure you all know, Sister Amy is our staff attorney, and she researching this topic, and we've been working on this topic for years, which is one of the misconceptions I want to clear up from the very beginning, that this issue has been on our radar going back about 5 years. Sister Amy's done legal research, had papers on it. We publicly discussed back in 2022 a proposal that was placed on the ballot that was trying to push forth a similar type of language that was also trying to redefine religion. We gave public talks about that. You can see that on our YouTube page and Facebook page. So the point that people may be saying, well, why is CAIR Michigan only talking about this issue in the final hour? Religious rights and some of the problems that we foresaw coming. We've been talking about this now going back 5 years, and maybe Sister Amy will go into some of that a little further. But again, that's just some of the misinformation that needs to be cleared up. Also, on the onset, I will also say that with the initial Elliot-Larsen Act and the language as is, we never lobbied to have any language removed from the existing amendments. We just asked for more robust language to be added, just as 22 other states have such language, as well as the District of Columbia, right? So, and I'll go into the implications a little bit later after Sister Amy's point as to why certain individuals refuse to actually add in the additional language. We don't think that was by accident, and they were approached. And I believe we believe that there's actually something perhaps we could say not in good faith that is being attempted, is being done in regards to not including that particular language, and there's history behind that as well. So let me first start off with 2 points before Sister Amy goes into some of the potential negative consequences of the lack of robust religious language. The first thing is that the added language to the Elliot-Larsen Act, or the amendment, number one, does not change our, what we could say, religious practice. And I use this term religion loosely, because as Muslims, we have a concept of deen, right? So for us, deen is not, well, you have a religious life and then you have a secular life, or you have a sacred life in private and a profane life in public. Like, that's not the Islamic conception. This is a more Western concept of you keep your religion in private, and then you have a public life that is secular or profane. That is not our understanding. And that deen indallah Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, and surely the complete way of life with Allah is al-Islam, right? So when we're saying deen or religion, from our perspective, this is what we mean and what we're talking about, not someone else's definition. But nonetheless, number one, we are still allowed to exercise our religious rights. So, for instance, to pray in schools when there's prayer time, right? To be able to have salah in our workplaces, to be able to wear religious attire that causes no impending or immediate, what we could say, impediment to be able to do one's job. So, for instance, women had the religious right to wear hijab and to be able to cover their bodies. Men have the right to wear lihya, or to be able to wear a beard for religious purposes, as we believe that this is sunnah mu'akkada, to wear a beard, right? Due to the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi rashidin wasallam, right? So it doesn't impede that, nor that you can be forced to affirm anything in your workplace or your school that goes against your sincerely held religious beliefs, meaning you have the right, I don't want to use like criminal language, but you have the right to remain silent, right? Like, you have the right not to be compelled to use pronouns of people that you don't want to use. If you can, like, we believe as Muslims, this is like a religious issue. Like, we believe in objective truth, and God made the dhakar and the untha, right? God made everything in binary, as the Quran says. Allah is the only non-binary, right? Everything in creation has a pair. As-sama has al-ard, right? The sky has the earth, for instance, as pairs. There's the dhakar and the untha. Everything's created as zawjain, as the Quran says. So someone being non-binary and calling someone a them or they, like, anyone can refer to themselves the way they want, but we don't have no one has a right to compel us to use any pronouns. Like, no one has a right to compel us to use any adjectives, right? So this is something that has not changed, at least for now. The second thing is that when it comes to religious leaders and also designated religious spaces that are incorporated as such as prayer sanctuaries. So I'll get to this. Firstly, religious leaders, be it an imam or be it a priest, whoever, is not compelled to perform a marriage that goes against their religious creed, right? So, for instance, just as it is forbidden, like, I would never marry a Muslim to a Hindu, right? Why? Because even if it's a man or woman, why? Because it's forbidden in Islam. Likewise, a sheikh or a sayyid is not discriminating against the Elliot-Larsen Act or committing as some sort of offense if he does not want to marry two men, or marry two women, or marry a trans man to a woman, or whatever it is, right? That's still preserved and still protected. The other thing is that in regards to prayer sanctuaries, right? So religious organizations, masajid, have the right to regulate their prayer space. So the masjid can have a rule that there are no women who are coming into the front row of the prayer rank, even though they say they're a trans man, for instance, or vice versa. A man who's claiming that he's a trans woman praying in the back of the musalla, that can be regulated. Otherwise, also in regards to regular religious usage and during service hours or educational hours, that are not open up to the general public, but to Muslims, that the bathrooms similarly are by birth gender, and that can be regulated. And in fact, we believe that masajid should start putting up actual signage to actually explicitly say such, because we've had incidences in some masajid in Detroit, in Dearborn Heights, and in Canton, where people came into the masjid and tried to not only use a different musalla space, but also to use different bathrooms. This already happened. Like, it happened at the Muslim Center. I actually was there in Detroit. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy be on Imam Abdullah Al-Amin, who we buried last Monday, who was at the Muslim Center. So these are a couple of things that have not changed. There's some Q&A, and I'll put these questions up on the screen a little later. My brother Khalil has some questions, because multiple questions have been raised. Some of these questions, brother Khalil, probably will be covered in our presentation, but nonetheless, we'll look over them at the end. We'll try to clarify that and those. And with that, I'll pass the mic to Sister Amy, so she can go through some of our legal analysis, not just here. Make this clear as well. We're not the only ones with this legal analysis. Other advocacy organizations, and we work closely with the Michigan Catholic Conference, who also came to the same conclusions in regards to this analysis. And maybe she can even point out to the origins of the bill, or who even wrote the bill, and how some state representatives, we can just say naively, took the advice of Attorney General Dana Nessel, which I'll just say that's, we'll use polite language and say that to depend on her legal analysis based upon her history and her animus towards legal religious organizations is quite naive. But nonetheless, we'll have Sister Amy come to the microphone now.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I want to start, as Brother Dawud said, it's very important to sort of take a step back from where we're at right now and kind of see how we got here. This is an issue that CAIR Michigan has been working on since 2018, when the first draft of this bill came out. And the first draft of this bill was drafted by a nonprofit special interest group called Equity Michigan. At the time, Dana Nessel was the director of Equity Michigan.
Or was it Michigan Equality?
Thank you. Michigan Equality. Thank you, Brother Dawud. Michigan Equality. And at the time, Dana Nessel was the one drafting this bill for Michigan Equality. It is a special interest LGBTQ group. The original version of this bill, as Brother Dawud said, did include the express protections for the LGBTQ community with regards to gender fluidity, gender identity, sexual orientation, and things like that. But what was also present in that bill was a redefining of religious expression in a way that would have definitively conflicted with our religious beliefs, but also was intended to narrow what would be protected as a religious protection under the law. So it was trying to sort of take away some of our religious protections under the law, at the same time granting more protections for other groups. So in 2020, the draft version of the bill was put up for a ballot initiative. They were collecting signatures, trying to get it on the ballot during the last general election in 2020. And they were misleading people. They were telling people that it was an expansion of the Civil Rights Act. And they were saying that it was going to provide more civil rights for all, which was inherently a mistruth, because what it did is provided civil rights protections for some and took away civil rights protections for others. So it was not expanding the law, as they were saying. CAIR Michigan was very quick. We came out, we wrote a memo, we put out infographics, we did a Facebook Live at that time, and we gave talks around the community about why our community and why other religiously observant communities might not want to support this bill. And it did not make it on the 2020 ballot, primarily because it was found to have, the petitions were found to have fraudulent signatures, and they didn't have enough actual authentic signatures that could be verified. So it wasn't put on the ballot. So this year it was introduced in January. Very, very early in January. as soon as the session started. As soon as it was introduced in January, we started to research the bill, research the language of the bill to see how similar and how different it was from the 2020 bill. And the only difference that we could find is that it did not have the language that limited the religious expression. Other than that, the bill was identical to that which was drafted by Dana Nessel when she was with that special interest group. Immediately upon hearing of the bill and seeing that they were bringing it up for votes, we attempted to provide testimony. We contacted other faith group leaders to see how we could join coalitions, and we actually joined a coalition with Michigan United, and Michigan Catholic Conference, and we began putting out action alerts, encouraging our constituents to contact their state reps and things of that nature to try to, as Brother Dawud said, try to add religious protections while not taking away anything else from the bill. So that's really been our focus this whole time. And there's been some misconceptions that have been going around that have been kind of being espoused by some of our own elected officials, including this ideology that they've contacted the Attorney General's office and that the Attorney General's office has assured them that it doesn't narrow any religious protections. And their claim that the Attorney General's office is nonpartisan. That if you watched our other video, I go really into depth about why that's not true. But just to reiterate here, it's not true. Policy is set by the Attorney General for how matters will be handled throughout the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General right now, Dana Nessel, has drafted a bill that intended to restrict religious freedoms and restrict what is considered to be protected religious practices. She's the person who will be setting the policy for how this law will be enforced, what lawsuits the state of Michigan will be involved in, and in which way they will come down on as it pertains to the interpretation of this specific bill. And let me give you a for instance for how that can play out. We were speaking a week or so ago with the leader of Michigan Catholic Conference, who spoke very eloquently about how this plays out. They were being sued by a same-sex couple that wanted to adopt. The Michigan Catholic Conference had objected to their adoption petition. They are an adoption placing agency, and they had done so based on religious grounds. This lawsuit started prior to Dana Nessel taking office, when our other our past Attorney General Bill Schuette was still in power. When Bill Schuette was in power, the state of Michigan intervened and were siding on the side of the Catholic Conference, saying they absolutely have a religious protection. And there's actually a law in Michigan that provides adopting and placing agencies with religious protections. And he said, we have this law. Michigan Catholic Conference is absolutely protected for their religious freedoms. Dana Nessel took over the case, and when she took office, and she switched sides. She no longer was on the side of Michigan Catholic Conference, and she was actually trying to interfere in the lawsuit in a way that led a judge in the Western District of Michigan to say that he felt that the Attorney General's office was attacking Michigan Catholic Conference based on religious freedoms. That resulted in Dana Nessel settling the case in favor of the LGBTQ couple, and against the Michigan Catholic Conference, resulting in Michigan Catholic Conference to then have to sue the state of Michigan in federal court. And these are the types of things that we're concerned about when we talk about why we need these religious protections in the bill, is because what we know is that change of policy, when leadership changes, can change the way that laws are enforced or interpreted. And we also know that with our judges in Michigan are elected officials, right? So we've seen, even in federal court recently, longstanding precedent becoming changed when there is a change in our judiciary. So we need the protections enshrined. And it's important to understand that the new protections that were placed in the expansion were done so based on a case that was decided by the Michigan Supreme Court. And the legislature said it's not enough that the case law went in their favor. We need to put it in the statute. And they did that because they know that it can change, and policies can change, and precedent can change when there's a change in leadership, either in the state or in the judiciary. So the fact that they refuse to put these religious protections in for religiously observant groups is an indication that they're not willing to provide the same safety net for religious protections that they did for other special interest groups. And that's why we're out here trying to educate our community. So just to clear up some other brief misinformation, and then I'll talk a little bit about what's at risk with this new change in the law. And then I think we're going to go over some questions. But so there's a lot of people out here saying that the Elliot-Larsen Civil Rights Act already protects religious freedoms. And that's true. But it protects religious freedoms expressly for individuals. The bill is a protection for individuals, and it's a bill that governs the behavior of organizations and institutions, meaning it provides feedback and guidance for how an organization or an institution must do business. And that's whether the organization is a nonprofit or whether it's for profit. The laws apply the same to both institutions. So it is not a protection of religious institutions. It just doesn't provide any protections. While there are some exceptions within the Michigan Elliot-Larsen Civil Rights Act for religious, we'll call them religious houses of worship, right? Specifically, they're for religious houses of worship. There is limiting language in the statute that limits when those houses of worship are protected and provides a basis for when they're not protected. So the fact that the statute contains limiting language. So what does that mean? What is the limiting language? So the provision that a lot of our state reps keep relying on is this 505 provision that says that religious buildings and religious places of worship are protected when they're used exclusively for religious purposes. And that's the limiting language. The limiting language comes when we talk about for religious purposes. So when we're talking about, Brother Dawud was saying that we can go to the musallas and we're going to pray and we can still gender segregate our prayer spaces in our bathrooms. That is absolutely true, because at that point in time, we are using the building for religious purposes. Same thing for weddings. If we're holding a wedding is a religious purpose. So we can have limits on who our imams will marry based on our sincerely held religious principles. But there are things that we do with our buildings that are not necessarily quote unquote religious purposes. And that includes when we invite guests into our building for things like open house, if we're being used as a polling center, if we're being used to hold a basketball tournament, if it's being used to hold a candidates forum where we are expecting people that are not members of the mosque or where religious services are not being performed to come into our space. And this includes masjids that have, say, for instance, a banquet hall. If you're renting the banquet hall to people who are non-members of your church or your masjid, or even members of your masjid in a way that doesn't have any limits on it for, say, a celebration of some sort, we may not be able to limit the ways in which that building is being used for that purpose based on the way that the law is, because of the limiting language. The same thing goes for our Islamic schools, and our Islamic schools are protected. There's an express exemption in the statute for our Islamic schools when it comes to hiring teachers that are being utilized to teach our youth. So if you are a teacher in an Islamic school, the Islamic school has the absolute right to hire teachers that not only comport with their religious beliefs, but actually embody their religious beliefs and lifestyle. But the provision doesn't extend necessarily all the way to support staff, including our office support staff or our janitorial staff and things of that nature. So there is also a limit to the exception there. So those are some of the problems that we have. One of the other things that we have is the Elliot-Larsen Civil Rights Act has a provision in it that says if you contract with the state of Michigan, you must sign an agreement that you will agree with and uphold all of the values that are espoused within the Elliot-Larsen Civil Rights Act. This poses a problem for our religious institutions for several reasons, because they will be forced to sign a contract that says that they agree with and believe in something that is expressly against our religious values, like the fact that a biological man can be considered a woman, or the fact that a biological man can marry a biological man, or a biological woman can marry a biological woman. Our religion doesn't allow us to hold those views. And our religious organizations are going to be required, in order to contract with the state of Michigan, to sign a contract that says that in fact that they agree with that. And if they don't sign the contract, they can lose state funding and they can lose benefits. And some of our elected officials say, well, if you sign a government contract and you're getting government services, then you have to uphold all of these laws, and you have to be generally applicable to everybody. And that's, first of all, it's not the standard of the law. The law and religious institutions fought for decades to be able to enter into these contracts and receive these benefits. And with the enactment of this law, we may have to fight again for decades to ensure that we're still being able to get the benefit of this, because the law right now says that we don't have to do that. But the state of Michigan is trying to compel the speech of our religious organizations by forcing them to sign this covenant. And that provides some level of insecurity to all of our institutions. So what we ask them to put in is really just an exemption, language that would exempt our religious organizations and our religious institutions, all of our nonprofits that are formulated based on a religious ideology, religious belief, and in the furtherance of our religious practice, like our charitable organizations, our Muslim foster care services, our Muslim family services that are providing these very important social services to our community and to broader communities, to protect them from having to sign these covenants, protect their spaces even when they're not being held out expressly for a religious purpose. Because there is a question as to whether or not, if Muslim Family Services holds a soup kitchen and they're inviting people in, whether they're going to be protected from a lawsuit under the new expansion of the Elliot-Larsen Civil Rights Act. And I just want to reiterate that we're not out here fanning the flames of conspiracy or fanning the flames of hyperbole. This is a real risk. This is being litigated across the country, even in states that have religious protections, because what we know as attorneys and lawmakers, and what we should know, is that when new laws are enacted that expand and the law or provide weaknesses in other areas of law, it will be tested. It's going to be tested. We know this. There are lawsuits that are brought in every jurisdiction that test the boundaries of the law to see how far they can push it. And we're not out here saying that Muslim organizations will lose, but it's inevitable that Muslim organizations and other religious organizations are going to get sued, so that the other communities can sort of test the boundaries of how far they can push this law to advance their own rights. So we're out here asking for language to be added to the bill to strengthen our rights. I also want to say, I know that there's a lot of questions about private businesses, right? So we have a lot of private business owners. This law absolutely dictates the way in which private business owners must govern their business and must govern the spaces that their public spaces that their businesses sit in, right? So if you're say a bakery and you have employees, you cannot discriminate against employees based on their gender, even if you have a sincerely held religious objection to that. You cannot deny services in a facility that you own based on a religious belief. There is not a provision that allows an exception for your personal beliefs when you have a public-facing business where you're providing services for profit to the general public. So no, that is not protected. This law does govern the ways in which we govern our private behavior in private businesses. So I think I don't know if Brother Dawud, if you want to talk about what we're asking everybody to do, or
yeah, I'll bring that up and post some other points, and then there's some questions we can just go over. But when Sister Amy says private businesses and gender, it's specifically relating to gender identity and not just biological gender. Like, it was already protected in the law that there is not to be hiring discrimination or discrimination regarding services or accommodations in a public facility based upon gender, we're talking about gender identity. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. If you're a Muslim and own a business, and if you deny someone a job specifically because they claim that they're non-binary or they claim that they're a trans woman, even if they like have a beard and as big as I am, then you could be liable for that, right? If you deny it based upon that. I also think that it could be a kind of a gray area. Let's say you have a fitness area or a gym that's public and it has membership, let's say a female only workout area, a female only spa, for instance. And a guy says, you know what, I'm gender fluid. And they want to go into that space. And you as a Muslim gym owner or any religion denies them access to that space, that could cause that business to be in legal jeopardy. So we just have to be clear that when gender is being used, it's also talking about gender identity, what a person self-selects to be their gender, or if they claim they have no gender at all and they're like non-binary, right? So we have to be clear about that. Another tangible example is Sister Amy was alluding to. There's a Jewish university right now in New York that's being sued. It's a private religious university that's not just teaching regular things for degrees. It literally serves as a seminary where people go there and learn the Talmud, the Torah. They're learning Hebrew, they're learning Aramaic, and they're producing like religious scholars according to Judaism. And they're literally are in a legal battle right now because some students came there to establish an LGBTQ club in that religious school, and they denied them. And based upon their incorporation, they lost in court the initial litigation, which the judge ruling said that this religious seminary has to either do one or two things: allow the LGBTQ group, student group, in the religious university, or abolish all student groups, because it has to be equal. So either there's no student groups or you have to include the LGBTQ group. This university was targeted, right? I'm saying this for a reason. Like, this is what Sister Amy's talking about, where they try to test the boundaries. We all know when we deal in civil rights world, and this goes back prior to probably everyone who's watching this was born, but civil rights organizations will pick a particular or an organization, special interest group will pick a particular institution or a particular case to try to extend the rights of a group of people, or to sanction or punish a group or institution. For instance, there were many African American women who got arrested for not sitting at the back of the bus. However, Rosa Parks was specifically sent that day. She was sent as an ideal person. Why? They vetted her background. She had a particular pedigree. She was well-spoken. She had a particular look about herself as colorism and a light-skinned African-American woman. She was literally picked to be the face of that litigation regarding the desegregating of buses in Alabama, right? It wasn't something where she just randomly sat down at the front of the bus that day. And this goes across the board, right? So there will be some sort of case that comes forward where one of these special interest groups or LGBTQ will try to insert themselves to file a suit against a religious school, or a community organization. So this is another important point. And again, I think some of those who believe Nestle and they must not know the history of civil rights and law. So they just lack knowledge because it's not their expertise, or they're completely naive. And I'm saying this with all due respect and husnul done, because I would never cast suspicion to say that they were behind promoting the agenda, because I don't think so. I think more so it's just a lack of knowledge and a severe naivety, right, and that's a problem. So what can we do going forward? I think I need to mention something else too before I continue. 2 Thursdays ago, I was in Lansing, the day in which this was in the House Judiciary in the state of the amendments. And then within like 4 hours, it was pushed through and signed in through law. Number one, I was not allowed to give testimony. I put forth our name under CAIR Michigan to give testimony, and House Judiciary gave 4 organizations that supported it a voice that day, and they gave a token voice to one organization that was against it, which was Michigan Catholic Conference. But there is a record that CAIR Michigan that we submitted, and that I was there for that submission to give testimony. So this whole idea that we haven't tried to give official testimony to the lawmakers and to be on record, that's simply not true. I was there. Number two, the amendments with the language that we wanted that 22 other states was put forward by different House representatives in the committee hearing. They all happened to be Republican. And it was down party lines. The Democrats had the majority. Every single Democrat on House Judiciary voted against the amendments for strengthening religious protections. Every Republican voted for. So it was down party lines. This is the other point. Also, in regards to some information, CAIR Michigan had been talking to state representatives outside of the Muslim community and inside the Muslim community about our concerns. And some of these were private conversations. Some others of these were in front of other community members, in which Sister Amy was involved in a couple of them. They were organized by Engage. We shared specific language that was in the other bills with our 2 state representatives. I personally shared it with them. Uqsama billah, I swear by Allah. I shared them the exact information and spoke with them. So that information was shared. So some people say, well, why didn't CAIR Michigan share the information? We did share the information, right? I even can share with you the markups in the language of the exact information. We could make it public. Actually, I think we will make it public. So you can see actually what we shared verbatim. So that's something else. It's not like we did not reach out to our representatives, and we reached out to Republican representatives because Democrats, because we already knew where that only a few, I think 3 Republicans reached over party lines, but this was put forth by Democrats. Also, on 2 Thursdays ago, this is another important point, that there were questions from the Republicans on House Judiciary towards the 2 co-sponsors, or at least the sponsor in the Senate side, State Senator Jeremy Moss, who happens to be from the LGBTQ community. And then the leader of this on the House side, State Rep Hoskins, who also is part of the LGBTQ community. One is Jewish, the other one's African American. They both live in the same area in Oakland County. When they were asked questions, they said, well, we're not attorneys, so we can't comment on any potential harm. There's 2 problems with this. And they said they defer things to the ACLU to answer, Jay Kaplan. And we've worked with the ACLU together on a number of issues over the years, just not on this, right? And we're on the total opposite side of this from ACLU, and I explain what happened after this. But no, there's 2 problems with their statements. Number one, if you are the leader of the bill in the Senate, and you are the leader of the bill in the state house, shouldn't you not know the legal implications of how it could harm other Michiganders? But you're just going to say, "Oh, I'm not an attorney, so I don't know if there's any potential harm. I'll leave that for the attorneys." Well, is it that you are not versed in the law, or that is it you're just trying to get out of answering the question because you know of the potential harms that could take place, in which they were asked some specific questions, including the issue of Title I funding, which Sister Amy referred to. They were specifically asked about this. How will this harm homeless shelters or battered women shelters who get funding through the state that are led by religious organizations? Because Muslim Family Services, for instance, runs 2 battered women's shelters, for instance, right? They didn't answer. The other problem is State Rep Hoskins said, well, I'm going to pass it over to the attorney to answer. He is an attorney. As a matter of fact, he was in Sister Amy's law school. They were together in law school at University of Detroit Mercy. So it's duplicitous. You see what I'm saying? It's I'm looking at this there. I'm like, man, this is the height of deception. Now, ACLU was also asked some specific questions that they didn't answer, the attorney there, in regards to particular harms that could happen to religious-based organizations in regards to this issue of the funding issue that is mentioned in the Elliot-Larsen Act that Sister Amy made mention to, that could negatively affect religiously based organizations, and he did not answer it either. So the problem is that, again, this language could have easily been added so that it would not be adding harm to religiously based institutions. But this particular act, as is, opens up litigation to make religiously based organizations a new discriminated group, right? So I just had to say that. But we were there, and I was there in Lansing for the actual hearing, and also when the Republicans put forth the amendments, one representative was so smug. He was on the Democratic side. He literally, when they voted no, he like smirked and like ripped up the language for the amendments to add more. He was like ripping it up, like he was very smug about it. SubhanAllah. Now, what can we do? The first is we need to contact our elected officials to place amendments, right? Because just as there were some amendments added, okay, some of our representatives can admit, well, there's some loopholes, there's some litigation going on in other states. In order to stop litigation taking place in Michigan against religious institutions, we can go ahead and admit that it needs to be strengthened so that everyone can be happy, so to speak, at least in regards to religious organizations, right? That can be amended. So we need to contact our elected officials, including those who co-sponsored it and those who voted for it. And both Muslim representatives voted for it, and one of them was a co-sponsor of it. That's no secret. And by the way, CAIR Michigan did not make that information public at first. We've been careful not to mention names in our writings and papers or on these lives. Actually, community members, mashallah, our community is very sophisticated. We're not dummies. They actually did the research and actually shared the names of like one of the Muslim co-sponsors. We never put that out. As a matter of fact, I found out about it afterwards that the brother was a co-sponsor. Even like when I spoke to him about it, I didn't even know he was a co-sponsor. Well, I didn't even know. I swear by Allah, I didn't know. The second is, for those of you who are on boards of religiously based organizations, including Islamic schools and masajid, please contact our office so that we can assess your bylaws. And we've already begun to do that, right? To make sure that the language is proper within your bylaws. Part of the issue with the Yeshiva University in New York is that its articles of incorporation were written as such that they didn't foresee. No one could foresee 75 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago that such litigation or such boundaries would be pushed, right? If you would have asked me this 20 years ago, I wouldn't have foreseen this, right? So there needs to be changing of articles of incorporation and amendments of certain organizations that are not written as religious organizations, that perhaps that can give them some greater protections, though they still could be sued, right? Still could be sued. The third point is continue to contact us on the individual level regarding if there's any violations against your individual religious rights based upon any policy change in your workplace or schools, right? Like if you begin to be bullied into using certain language or pronouns or things as such, please contact us in regards to that. It could be in schools, workplace. And, when we look at trends, I can easily see the next thing that's going to be pushed is something similar that what was passed in Canada not long ago. There was a bill that was passed in Canada, it's called Bill C-16, that if you so-called misgender someone, you could be brought in front of a tribunal, but they have a different system there than we do here. They have a parliamentary system in tribunals. Basically, if you misgender someone and don't call someone by their preferred pronouns, you could face civil liability in Canada, right? And be sanctioned and or pay a fine. And I could easily see this taking place for people. The next thing to be pushed, that people will lose their jobs, it'll affect their grades, or they are sued for monetary damages for not using certain pronouns. We can foresee what's coming because they're trying to push the boundaries further and further, right? And we as CAIR Michigan, someone said, "Oh, I heard a comment about from someone that they question our legislative agenda." Our legislative agenda is very clear at CAIR Michigan. We are a nonpartisan organization. We are neither Democrat nor Republican. Some of our first major litigation was against the Obama administration, right, regarding religious profiling. Our number one concern is to protect the religious rights of American Muslims and Michigan Muslims in particular, those residing in Michigan. Actually, in the Maqasid al-Sharia, the first maqsid of our sacred path is Hizbut Din, the protection of our ability to practice our religion trumps everything else, right? And we have a special interest. We want to protect the religious rights of Muslims, and through protecting which means working in coalition with others. If Christians get their religious rights marginalized, Catholics, by de facto, we lose ours. De facto, we lose ours, brothers and sisters, right? So, for us, it's not. We're not picking sides. We're not trying to be part of this culture war. We're neither with Ashabul Himar or Ashabul Fil, right? Neither side. We have a special interest in this: protect the dignity of our community of Islam, not just being Muslim as some sort of quasi-ethnic identity that does not factor in religious practice. We are about protecting our religious conscience and religious practice, right? So that's where we're as an organization, and I just want to be very clear about that. For the cultural Muslims or secular Muslims who prioritize other things, their priorities are not our priorities. We're an Islamic organization, right? And that's with the right or the left. And I will leave it at that. We're going to go over some of these questions again. Some of these may have been answered already, but we'll go over them just for the sake of refresher of those who came on late. As Muslims, we believe that marriage is between a heterosexual man and a heterosexual woman. With this amendment, will a masjid that refuses to provide an Islamic marriage contract between members of the LGBT community be protected against litigation? Yes, we are still protected from that.
I just want to make one caveat to that. And this is, I said it Sunday in our meeting, and I want to say it here again. There's a difference between being protected from liability and being protected from litigation. We know Americans in general, we are a very litigious society. We like to sue. The way you test boundaries is you sue. So can we guarantee that people will not bring a lawsuit against a masjid because of this? We cannot guarantee that, because that is their aim, right? To challenge these if they want to bring it. But if they bring a lawsuit, would the masjid be protected from legal and financial liability as a result of a lawsuit brought based on this issue? Yes, they absolutely would be protected from legal liability.
Thank you very much for the clarification of what I said, Sister Amy. And by the way, the Islamic marriage contract is different from the marriage certificate that you get from the state of Michigan. Those are different things, right? And even we clarify between a heterosexual man and heterosexual women, it's not lawful for Muslims to marry all heteros. It's not lawful for Muslim men to get an Islamic contract for all heterosexual women. Like I mentioned, it's unlawful Islamically for a Muslim man to marry a Hindu woman or vice versa, right? That would be an invalid Islamic marriage contract. Let's go to the next question. As Muslims, we believe that God created human beings as male and female. As religious institutions, if we hire only people who identify with their biological gender, are we protected from litigation? Again, that goes back to what Sister Amy said. There is no foolproof way of not getting sued at this particular time. Would the case have merit or standing or go forward? Would the masjid be protected? That's a different thing. But finish with the answer, Sister Amy, please.
So the answer to that is it depends. So there is an express clergy exemption that's understood in every case law all the way up to the Supreme Court. The clergy exception is for our religious leaders and also for our religious schools and our religious school teachers. It may or may not, and it's untested at this time, whether it may or may not protect other support staff that are not in a religious leader. They're not a sheikh, they're not an imam, they're not providing like Sunday school education. So our support staff in our religious places of worship in our Islamic schools may or may not be protected under the Elliot-Larsen Civil Rights Act from litigation. It's unknown at this time.
Yep. So just like the answer she gave about the Islamic school, the same thing could be for a masjid secretary, down to someone who is landscaping or the janitor. There could be some sort of financial liability against our masajid, as is now. Did CAIR organizations communicate with Ayash and El Abbas about the new law was passed last week? Yes. Is our mosque protected from the LGBT community? Well, that's too broad of a question about what you mean by protection. I mean, obviously the imams or shia can still preach that it's sinful, that it's spiritually harmful, that it's haram, that no marriages are performed in the masajid. The LGBTQ allowed to go to pray in a woman's room and use the ladies' room if they turn himself from man to woman. Masajid, as we mentioned, can have clear signage, especially during general usage where there's no public expectation. Masajid can still have a policy where biological, the men's room is for biological males, it's for the dhakar, and the woman's room is for biological untha, for the female. As religious institutions, are we mandated to provide accommodations to non-binary persons visiting our masajid?
That's an it depends question. It depends on what you're doing in the masjid. As I said during my talk, it depends on what you're doing. If you're holding religious services or performing anything that falls within the scope of our religious worship, or religious duties, marriages, things like that, then no, you're not. If you're doing other things in your masjid other than express religious worship, you there's a possibility that there might be some legal jeopardy there.
This was answered already. As a small business owner that caters to 99% Muslim customers, am I exempt from litigation if I hire only people who identify with their biological gender? No, you are not exempt. You are not exempt. Under the current amendment to the Elliot-Larsen Act with LGBTQ, you are not exempt, my brother. Many of our Muslim sisters go to exclusively, I answered this too. Many of our Muslim sisters go to an exclusively female gym. With the passage of this amendment, can these gyms exclude biological men who identify as a woman if they're open to the public? No. That's something that our state reps didn't seem to glean. SubhanAllah. Today, if there is a facility that only has male and female restrooms, does this amendment allow biological men that identify as women to go into the female restrooms?
It's possible, to be honest with you. So the law is what the law is, but what the law means and how it's applied is dependent on how the courts will decide. And that will be very fact specific, and it will require a court intervention. I can tell you that our public school systems, though, after speaking with some people who are working in the public school system, the public school systems do believe that, in fact, this law requires bathrooms to be open to people who identify as any gender. So as it pertains specifically to restrooms and locker rooms in the public school, the schools have interpreted this law to mean that biological men who identify as women or can use the women's restroom, or biological women who identify as men can use the men's restroom. So that's the way it's being interpreted by institutions. Whether that's going to uphold in every circumstance will be dependent on what the judiciary decides when and if a case is brought.
Does this amendment apply to children? I mean, it's the law. And I'll give you a tangible example. Let's say, okay, you're a minor until the age of 18. We know that 16-year-olds, for instance, apply for jobs at businesses or work in businesses. Like I got my first job. Actually, I got my first job when I was 15. But let's say someone comes who's a minor and comes and applies for a job, and they identify as non-binary, or they clearly look like a biological male, but they identify as a trans girl, though they're a minor. Yeah, the same thing applies. Does this amendment apply to private and public schools? Well, let me backtrack with public schools. Public schools include charter schools ran by Muslims. Yes, so this applies across the board to charter schools, right? So a charter school that's ran by Muslims, and there's more than one, if someone comes to that charter school and applies for a job and they get discriminated against because they identify as being gender fluid, non-binary, trans, gay, or lesbian, they can face legal liability, right? That's clear. Private school, Sister Amy went over that as regards to the teaching staff that does not protect the private schools, religious schools, regarding support staff. Our state reps, Ella Abbas and Ayash, are pushing and spraying rumors that it shouldn't impact the religious institutions. Well, we've already made that clear. Going further, and we love our brothers for the sake of Allah, and we're trying to practice adab al-ikhtilaf, right? Which, to be quite frank, had they not been Muslims, we would have been more aggressive and actually mentioned their name and even been encouraging our constituents to be even, what's the word I would say, Sister Amy? More energetic, right, in approaching them. But that's not the case. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi. I personally recall having a conversation, and I said that more masajids that allow inoculation sites on their premises will soon be forced to allow it. Okay. Well, I don't know about inoculation, but I say we'll reiterate the point that religious organizations that open themselves up to the public or masajid become quasi-public spaces, right? So if it's for giving inoculations, if it's for like serving the general public as a food pantry, if it's a polling site, if you're having candidate forums, then then that opens up the masajid or religious institution to potential liability if they don't let people, for instance, use the bathrooms that they self-select. Then it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem. A few years ago, there was an individual coming to masajid as a covering Muslim, but was clearly a man. Where does the man in woman's clothing go to the bathroom in masjid? He insists going in the ladies' room. So I'll give you a prime example of something that we dealt with at the Muslim Center. There was a brother who walked into the sister's bathroom that was clearly a brother, but he said he identified as a sister, and the sisters knew that he was a brother. They came out of the bathroom and they came to the imam and to the administration. I was actually at the masjid that day, the Muslim Center. They pulled the brother to the side. He said that he identified as trans woman, but had not done any surgeries or any like hormone replacement. So they were like, look, around the corner, there is a single usage bathroom. You can use that. That wasn't good enough for the person though, because that person wanted to go in with everyone else and they did not come back. But again, masajid can have their own rules under general circumstances, like it's Salatul Jummah, or the month of Ramadan's coming up, like Salatul Taraweeh, right? Or whatever programs. The masjid has a right to regulate the bathroom, right, during those religious times and religious services going on about who uses which bathroom. They have that right. But again, it's awkward. It's awkward if you send, and it's never the other way around, by the way. It's never a woman claiming to be a trans man going into the brother spaces. It's always the other way. A man who claims he's a trans woman. But then again, it becomes awkward, right? If someone who's wearing hijab and wearing jilbab then walks up into the men's bathroom, right? But nonetheless, it's okay. What is this right here? Okay, I'm sorry for putting that up. Hold on. Is the masjid liable as houses of worship non-businesses say, no, this is man, ladies, Islamic dress going to ladies' bathroom? We mentioned that already. If the masjid becomes a quasi-public space, that could be a problem. If there's like candidates forums or things of that nature. Okay, I think these are being redundant. Interesting question. Would it be better for Muslims to not sign contracts with the state of Michigan? That's an individual call, but when we're talking about religious institutions, this relates to funding and being able to do certain services, right? So we mentioned Muslim foster care services or Muslim family services. This was a problem that the Catholic community had to litigate. Was, the Catholic community said it went against their religious doctrine to place children in same-sex couple households, right? And that is what started some litigation.
I also, if I could add to that too, it's important to understand that the law says that any contract that can be entered into by by somebody who's non-religious can be entered into for a religious group. And this is for public benefits. It's very important to understand this is for public benefits. Some of these contracts help fund better education for our Islamic schools by providing extra resources for was Title I, which deals with math and English explicitly. So we should not, as a religiously observant group, have to decide whether or not we're going to be able to provide our children with quality education in an Islamic setting or practice our religion in general. Like it is something that the courts have already decided that is not something that we should have to do. We should not have to forego a public benefit or risk jeopardizing our religious expression. So we don't want to not engage in contracts. We want the contracts to be fair and equitable and not require us to choose between the public benefit and our religion, because that's what's required under the law.
All right, we'll make this the last question right here, and then closing comments. How many states have adopted this law or in the process of doing so? So as we mentioned before, Michigan has become an outlier. There are 22 other states plus the District of Columbia that have passed laws to expand their civil rights statutes to include LGBTQ. However, those other 22 states had explicit and more robust language to protect religious conscience of religiously based institutions. Michigan has done something unprecedented. And I think that Michigan, what they've done here is that Michigan is a battleground or a test ground, we could say, for what other states will then try to push forward. I believe that Michigan, this is my opinion, Allah knows best, but I believe that Michigan was used as a test ground to then try to push this into other states without the explicit religious protections. And Allah knows best. I've answered that already. No churches. Okay, some of these questions are redundant, so we will conclude with this. I will just say, brothers and sisters and stuff, if you have any questions or clarifications, you can always contact CAIR Michigan's office. We encourage all religiously based organizations, not just Masajid or Islamic schools, but those who are doing services for the people, be it feeding people, foster care, granting clothing, shelter, those things that are noble faith calls towards, that you contact us so that we can look at your bylaws. And if you have any complaints of religious discrimination, please contact us. We will either take care of it or we can refer you to another organization. Yeah, I answered this question already, Brother Hussein. Yes, I did communicate with the brother that you're talking about in the chat. Yes, we talked more than once, and I shared our concerns and the language, and Sister Amy spoke with him as well. We're at your service. And then also, I have to say this with, and it's not to throw shade on any other organization, but in Michigan, to be quite frank, CAIR Michigan is the only Islamically based organization that is advocating for our religious rights and protections based upon Islamic principles, right? And we have a very modest staff as far as numbers. And for us to continue doing our work, we need your dua and we need your financial support during Ramadan. We're not getting a bunch of foundation money and grant money from outside entities, from political PACs, from left or so-called progressive organizations and foundations. We are funded by the grassroots of our Muslim community. And that's how we're able to stay independent, because we don't take money from other people. There's a saying, who funds you runs you. Who funds you runs you. So we get funded by the grassroots of our community. And during the month of Ramadan, more than ever, whether we're talking about this issue or the book issues in public schools, or what's taking place right now in Bloomfield Hills, that we're dealing with that. We need your dua, and we need your monetary support, to be quite frank. And I'm not shy of asking you for it, because I'm not asking you for myself. I'm asking you to support you. I'm asking you to support you. And if we talk the talk, we have to walk the walk, or the same with to put our money where our mouth is, right? And this is where it is. And I ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect all of us and protect our children, to bless us in this remainder of Shahr Sha'ban, to have us live to see the month of Shahr Ramadan, to increase us in our sustenance, to have us be of those who say, Sami'na wa ata'na, we hear and we obey. We ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept all of our fasting in the upcoming month of Ramadan, to accept all of our qiyam, all of our night prayers, to accept all of our tilawat al-Quran, all of our recitation of Quran, to accept all of our sadaqah, all of our zakat al-mal that we give. And we ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our righteous predecessors who passed before us. In particular, we ask for the maghfirah and rahmah of Imam Abdullah Al-Amin, who just recently passed away. We ask for his forgiveness, Ya Rabbil Alameen. And we ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect all of those who are standing for justice against defamation, against slanders, against lies, against the machinations of those who are working for outside entities, be it from governmental entities or be it for people with agendas against Islam and Muslims. We ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give his divine protection for all of those who are fulfilling the command of the Quran, Kunu qawwamina bil qist, for those who are standing and striving to be upright, to implement justice and witnesses of Allah. And with that, my brothers and sisters in Islam, please pray for us. And I wish you all upcoming Ramadan Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.